topics. Let me do some introductions first. Just a small note from me about podcasting. Podcasting is incredibly popular at the moment. In the last couple of years, it's boomed since Serial in the US did some fine work. And in Australia, we have a couple of stellar podcasts which have also done extraordinary work. The Teacher's Pet comes to mind, and also the Vanishing. The Lady Who Vanishes, let me get that right. These are extraordinary pieces of journalism and work, and also damned entertaining, and in a couple of cases they've actually stimulated justice to finally happen after a very lengthy period, which is incredibly refreshing. That's pretty much at the top end of the market. The podcast market is incredibly varied. Everyone from people who probably shouldn't be podcasting and possibly shouldn't be operating a microphone, through to what I would suggest is the Paris end, people who know their business. They've been through the traps. They understand their dealings with victims of crime. They understand they're dealing with complex legal situations on occasions, and they also know how to tell a bloody good story. These are not wide-eyed innocents having a crack at podcasting, and these not wide-eyed innocents are here this afternoon. Beside me, John Sylvester, coming up from Melbourne. The Naked City is his latest book just out, and I think one of Australia's greatest ever crime journalists, currently writing for The Age. Beside him, Mark Morrie, and Josh on the far end. The pair of these gentlemen write for the Daily Telegraph. If you want to know anything about crime in Sydney, go straight to the Daily Telegraph. Don't waste your time elsewhere. They've got it nailed, and as of last night, nailing one of the biggest stories around, the soon-to-be return of one of the most insidious organised criminals Australians ever seen, a guy called Hako Naik. Also very wealthy for a bloke who didn't seem to be terribly busy in business. Beside them, the two doctors, Xanthi Mallet and Tim Watson-Munro. Again, podcasts are currently out at the moment, lots of books as well, which will be available outside later. Two of the greatest minds operating in true crime. Xanthi is a criminologist of worldwide repute, and Tim Watson-Munro's been in and out of jail since the late 70s as a psychologist. And if you want to know something about, if you want to get into a criminal mind, then Tim is the person to do it. But I would suggest probably you wouldn't want to get into Tim's mind. So, ladies and gentlemen, welcome this afternoon. Where do we start, I suppose? Podcasting. What attracted you to it? A couple of you have given up the typewriter almost and moved into podcasting. What's the great attraction you find for podcasting?
Can people hear? Yeah. I met Xanth actually through this festival back in 2017, and we had an immediate kind of affiliation, if you could put it that way, meeting the minds. And we wondered for a long time how we could work together. And then we thought, aha, podcasting. And Xanth can speak for herself, a background in criminology, internationally acclaimed. I've been working in psychology and crime since 1978, a long time. And so we put a proposal together, and it's much easier to do a podcast than to write a book. That's part of it.
Yeah, I would also say that we spend a lot of time talking. Like, we talk every day, and we mostly talk about cases, and then we're like, we could do this, and then other people kind of listen. So yeah, it's kind of fell into it really. But it's been really rewarding. I've really enjoyed it, and it's something we're going to continue doing. We like sharing what we do with the public.
I agree with Tim. It's a lot easier than writing.
Yeah.
And I'm basically very lazy. And then all the production gets left up to other people, doesn't it, Josh?
So, sure does. That's me, yeah.
Yeah.
I think for us, it's not us, but there's a massive fascination with crime, obviously, because you guys are all here to hear us talk about it. But with us in the Telegraph in the past couple of years in particular, with some of the things that have been going on in Sydney with the gang war, and then there's also just the day-to-day crimes that we cover. Last week, the horrible case of Lily James, every other tragedy that you hear about, we deal with it day to day, talking to police. And so we can kind of give an insight that probably other people can't. And there's just an appetite for anything that we dish up. Like, it's not Moz and I. If we put it in the paper, if we put it on the website, if we put it on TikTok, if we put it on...
I think you're underselling us.
Yeah. If we put it on a podcast, people want to listen. There's just that insight. So I think that's why we have started doing it.
Yeah, and I think, as you said, it's this new way of for people to get their crime. You know, they can still read a book, but there's this other way where they can listen while, you know, the podcasts have become a very portable way of listening to, you know, everyone's loved crime since, you know, well, Perry Mason. There must have been shows before that, weren't there, in crime, John? Not that, because you're a bit
Yeah, I was
older.
in them.
Yeah.
Well, what's so new? I mean,
Dragnet.
around the 30s, people gathered around the radio to listen to crime serials. So it's just a different medium to bring it. In my case, having been a bowerbird, I had all these old VCR record of interviews, little tapes, which some I'd thrown out, but then they got a new life. So you're able to hear from the real crook or the real confession put in, and to actually hear that, it just often defeats the written word. Go across the road and have a look at the Walkley Award pictures, photographs, and you see those and realise that that is the image. Now, I did a podcast with a woman called Cara Douglas, and she had been shot and nearly died, and it was Christopher Hudson from Sydney, a big bikie, who in the middle of Melbourne shot her, and two incredibly brave men went to protect her, and Hudson was a huge man, so forget the gun. As you went to try and deal with him, you knew that you were going to get hurt. Anyway, Brendan Keeler, the solicitor, was killed, and a backpacker was seriously injured. The moral of the story was that Cara was never treated as a victim, and she felt she was never allowed to grieve as a victim because we judged her because she was a stripper. And we all think we're a bit better than that, but she was seen as almost an accomplice. And there were stories which had gone into her Facebook. And it was all about her breast size and this and that and the other, while she was fighting for her life. What I'm getting at is that within that, I've explained the terrible nature, but if we had it now and played it, you would understand everything about crime in a nanosecond, because there is the call to the police, and there is a guy who is going to work, and his voice is very excited, he's full of adrenaline, and he's ringing and saying, there is a man with a gun. He's on the corner of such and such and such and such. Right, what sort of gun? Mate, he says to a passerby, mate, do you know what sort of gun it is? And then you hear the gun fire, and this man's voice goes to hysteria, and he is screaming, oh my God, he's killed them, he's killed them, he's killed them, oh my God. And the D24 instructor, operator, is trying to calm and say, where are you? How many are down? And you, as soon as you hear that, you know that man's life will never be the same. Now, if I wrote, or we wrote, you know, a shattered man, a shattered witness, your eyes just glaze over it. But if you listen to that, that's it. And when you hear somebody confess to murder and they're matter of fact, you know, like one of them had killed 3 people, he's going, and then he came through, and it's like the chick, he does and then I just went kaboom. And so you're hearing this guy just matter of fact talk about it. So there's a lot in the podcast world that, you know, sort of jumps print in a way.
It adds another dimension to it. It makes it real time. And if you've got access to the sort of material you do, John, it just makes it fabulous listening. I think the other thing is that you can't read a book while you're driving a car, stating the obvious, but a lot of people say to me, I really like listening to your podcast when I'm driving to work. I just plug it in. It has great educational value. And it's one of the things that we pride ourselves on, that we said we don't want what we do to be salacious, not suggesting that what you do is, but we want to do a sort of a deep dive from a criminologist's point of view, a psychologist's point of view about motive and method. What is it that drives these people? How do they do it? And how can we educate the broader public in that regard? So I think it's just using 21st technology. Of course, we had Bakelite radios before I was born and subsequent to my birth for a little while, but podcasts are great. You can listen to them anywhere. You can listen to them on aeroplanes. I had an approach a while back from a producer in the USA who heard something that I'd spoken about years ago that was on a Virgin flight. It was part of their entertainment package. it sets up all sorts of connections, and it's an interesting dialogue that occurs from it. What do you think?
Yeah, I particularly like the educational side of podcasts because, as Duncan said at the beginning, there are some really bad ones. I won't name them, but like podcasts.
I might later.
Yeah, true. Yeah, ask me later. True crime podcasts done by comedians, for example. I personally think that's really disrespectful. I didn't name anyone, but it's like, I know my lane, and I think that when you're working in a space where there are victims and there are families to consider, then there's a way to approach it and there's a way not to approach it. And I think it always has to be done from a respectful place. And there has to be a reason for doing it. It shouldn't just be a voyeuristic step through of retelling a story and potentially re-traumatizing people. You've got to be trying to achieve something. There's got to be trying to help someone, educate someone. Otherwise, I don't think we should be doing it.
Yeah, I agree. And going to Duncan, and what really kicked it all off in Australia is there's 2 points I want to make over teacher's pet, probably 3. I'm very jealous of Headley because I didn't do it, and very successful. But he went a very fine line because he recreated a cold case. But at the same time, the police were already investigating, and they had the shits, I'm telling you now, because they were worried he was going to stuff up their investigation that they were doing. And I think, fortunately for everybody, it actually had a very good outcome. Now, would Dawson have been charged without the pressure that came from Headley's? Probably not. Then again, he did run the danger of perhaps contaminating certain witnesses, but in the end it was a terrific result. But the other thing I'm still struggling with is how do you monetize these podcasts? I think we're struggling with that. The other problem is, while everyone loves true crime, advertisers don't like to be associated with people being shot, raped and killed. They just don't think it's really good for their product. So even Headley's, which had zillions of hits, it was given away for free. It didn't make a lot of money. And while it was a runaway success and New Zealand were very happy, I think Lachlan might have said, well, how much money did we make? And I don't think it was a lot. But then again, it does branding. There's all different offshoots. But that's one of the things that I'm finding. It's very good for branding, I suppose, but our guys want to know where the money is.
Didn't the Australian originally start by putting on the wrong side of the paywall?
Yeah.
And then they decided then they couldn't move it back across the paywall. I suppose if you're going to want it to listen to it,
I'd like to know, do many people here pay for their podcasts or? Yeah. Yeah, do you? See, I haven't listened to any apart from the raw ones that Josh and I do, and he sends me the raw one to see whether I've defamed anyone.
Which sort of takes you down the path too of the amount of time that goes a podcast that you're doing, apart from decades of expertise and all that sort of jazz. It's the sheer amount of time and money that has to be invested into it to actually make it the quality that you expect, and it's always strikes me as being unusual. You're on social media, for example, and someone says, oh, it's behind a paywall. I think, well, congratulations. I'll go down and shoplift at the bottle shop next time as well, using your same principle. But the amount of time and effort that goes into producing, a half-hour podcast?
I'd have no idea. I go in there, have a gibber, and then it's left up to other people to put it on.
Yeah, he's not lying. He just, I'm telling you, he walks in and we're not sitting next to each other today because we're sick of each other this week. We've done 2 podcasts of TikTok. We've worked together for 5 days, and I said to someone yesterday after we did a podcast, I said, God, he's annoying. I said, he just sits there and he just gibbers about stories from the 80s and the 90s and the 2000s, and I was in primary school, and he gibbers away, and they are bloody fascinating. I said, it is just brilliant listening, and that's where I'm very lucky with Moz and all you guys. I'm just a young pup, but you have so much experience, and so that's why your stories are so riveting. But yeah, we are kind of lucky in what we do because of how well we get along, because of how closely we work together, that we just get in there and they hit rolling and we just start talking.
But then after that, I don't know what happens.
You don't? No, you don't. I do a little bit of editing.
Again, it goes
to
the money that goes into making these things. I don't know with you guys, like when you do yours, who does the production? Is it expensive? And And then are people paying? It's
We have a
I,
great
it's not because I'm
studio
interested in money. It's like
made in Katana. I'll give them a bit of a plug. And it's the same deal, though. We did one this morning. We just rock up. We know our stuff. But, then it's over to you and they turn out a pretty good product. And that's why I say it's easier than writing a book, because writing a book, it's a labour of love. I'm not sure that the profit margins are all that different, to be honest, with publishing books in Australia. But I enjoy it, and I enjoy working with Xanth. We come at things from similar but different angles, and we bounce off each other. And I find it a very sort of therapeutic, pleasurable experience doing podcasting.
we're now doing what's it, vodcast.
Is that where you
That's
drink
what we
vodka?
do. Yeah. Do you do? Yeah.
Which video?
Yeah, that's where the VOD
What
comes
is-
from.
what
I
is-
figured that out. It was really funny.
I was just about to ask if you knew what it meant.
Oh, yeah?
What
What I
I
don't
thought it meant you were
understand,
drinking
I still don't understand this TikTok stuff that we do. And that's another phenomenon. But some girl comes over from another section of the paper. Videos, again, 2 minutes of us talking about someone being shot or whatever. And then I go to pick up my son at some dingy bar where he's been playing, piano. And all these young people go, "Oh, you're the TikTok guy." And I go, I thought it was Tim Tams, or I had no idea. And my son's going, "Shit, I've just done this great concert." And everyone wants, he says, "Oh, Dad, the TikTok guy." It's another, and I think the same with the podcast, especially with younger people, because they're lazy and don't like reading. No, I have an example over there.
Well, yeah.
I mean, he's written a book with me, but he actually hasn't read one. Yeah, we wanted to know what a prologue was. I think he thought.
Yeah, I made the mistake of saying that I don't really read books, and I'm going to make another mistake now and say I don't actually listen to podcasts. I've listened to one. Greg Berup's.
Particularly didn't want to listen to Headley's because I knew there was an opportunity I'd really stuffed up. But anyway,
You do vodcasts?
I drink vodka. But I thought I had a really good one. Howard Marks was the biggest cannabis distributor in the world, and an incredibly good bloke. And he was an Oxford graduate, son of a Welsh tugboat driver's had a voice like Richard Burton from a lot of cannabis, and he never hurt anyone. He had his own freighter. He had a fake rock band, so he had giant speakers that he took into America full of cannabis, and the band was called Laughing Grass, so they were trying to work it out. I actually nailed him. He was arrested, and I rang the North Dade Detention Centre in Florida and said, "Is Howard Marks there?" And they said, "Yeah, who wants to know?" And I said, "Yeah, sure." I had this amazing interview with Howard, and he talked about all the Australian crooks. He was world's best bloke. And at the end he said, "John, I've got to go. There's a bloke here who killed for the phone." And I mean that literally. And I thought, this is magnificent. And I had pressed the voice activated button on the tape, which meant all you could hear was my nasal questions and not one word of Howard. So there was a world exclusive in the bin.
Which is sort of a tip to take a producer with you on occasions. If you're like me, which I do exactly the same thing, and think, the light didn't come on. Yeah, how did that happen? Or the new iPhones, by the way, which actually delete everything after an hour, as we found out after did a 2-hour interview in Bangkok for a podcast, and the guy doing it said,
this is why you need a Joshy along that
I'll just
actually
play it
knows
back
all
to
that
see
sort of stuff. You need all that support.
you look at it and think, which button do I press now? Which is how a question about the transition from the era of typewriter ribbons and telex machines through to podcasting these days. It's not a bad life change. I mean, for Josh, it's easy. Xanthi, easy. The rest of us,
Yeah, but it's
Mark, you would have filed off the top.
I was just going to say last night, it was a perfect example, I think. Got a phone call at about 10 to 7 saying about this Haken Ayek has been arrested, one of Australia's most wanted men. And I grew up in the old days of 4 or 5 editions where you filed to somebody who wrote down. So you did it over a 2-way radio while you're out on the streets and stuff. And because I can't file as quickly as he can on laptops and phones, I got to one of the people at work and I just said, right, Haken Ayek, one of Australia's most wanted men. I did about 7 or 8 paragraphs off the top of my head, which is from years and years of training. So that transition. So talking on a podcast isn't a real big problem, you know.
You've done it all your life.
Yeah, and that skill of doing that, I think, is lost because they were able to put it straight away. You know, in fact, we had a rule back then. We used to file the copy takers. There were banks of people of typists who would take down your copy, so you would file from out on the road. But there was a union rule that you weren't allowed to file to the copy takers from inside the building. And I just, you know, I hated writing. I'd just go to the pub and just file from there, and it was directly across the road, you know, so I didn't have to do my own writing. So.
You still do?
Yeah, occasionally, yeah.
I've got to get you one of our T-shirts, which is "Stop Break New Par," which is what you would say to the copy taker.
That's right.
Stop break new par.
You wouldn't know that, would you? Break new, but it's okay, don't worry.
So only dinosaurs know that.
Every
But
day.
it's
What about
interesting how those skills come back. Now, you were a deadline artist with your several editions, which means that you can do a podcast, you know, on your ear.
I think that the big problem is, as you can probably see now, is I sometimes tend to ramble, which you're not allowed to do when you're writing, you know, very short, succinct pars. So I love the freedom of the podcast, is what it gives you to be able to talk about, and you're allowed to put nuances into stories that you don't get in the
Who
written
edits
word.
your material then? You say you dump it and go.
He doesn't know. Who edits the material?
Who edits the material?
Because
John?
there's
Yeah.
Do you mean on the podcast?
Yeah.
Yeah, I do. No, he doesn't have any idea. But it's funny, that point. It's one of the best bits of our podcast, and one of the most annoying bits when you have to edit it is, like Moz and, you know, all you guys are just a vault of incredible stories, and he just can't help himself. Every 30 seconds it'll be bang. You know, we're talking about Lily James and he goes off about Anita Cobby. We'll be talking about some shooting and he'll go off about something else, and it's incredible. And I just sit there half the time and I don't interrupt him, annoyingly, because then I've got about 5 minutes of copy to edit, or, you know, noise. I'll call it noise to edit. And but it's just fascinating to listen to.
But again, and ours are very, very short. I don't know what are ours, 20 minutes? Or
What are ours?
no, how long? I mean,
Yeah, they're about 20 minutes.
so I actually sometimes think that people maybe want to hear a whole lot more. I don't know how long. How long do yours go for?
Look, it varies.
I was talking about the podcast then.
That varies too. We get in a guest who talks about their exposure to the crime or their area of expertise, and then we will do a deep dive on the topic. So we looked at toxic relationships. Very topical one at the moment that we released, I think it was the first one, was why men kill women. Looking at the red flags, we had some amazing guests around that story. We looked at institutional child sex abuse. We had a survivor of that come and talk to us. And so it really depends on the length of the interview, and then it tends to be in two parts. We then talk about that topic and what these people have said from our respective areas of expertise, and that's where it comes together. They generally last, about 40 minutes to an hour, something like that. But the time goes very quickly. We're doing one this morning. The hour just went like that. And that is the problem, you know, with war horses, old guys like me and you, not John,
And
of
he's
course,
even
not
older.
John, of course.
Not
But
Just state
we
that.
can tend to ramble because there's so many trigger points in the conversation
And we're that old.
that gets you onto another topic.
But does that work because it's like eavesdropping into a conversation? With yours particularly, is it?
Ours is almost very anecdotal. Like, it's just we get in there, and I think they're starting to put the bits about me trying to turn off my phone and him putting on airplane mode, and that's put on the podcast as well.
I think the best ones are the conversational pieces. If you can drift into that, you get a really good product, you know, and people then feel that they're part of that conversation.
So I'd love
and
to
they
do
enjoy
what
it.
Headley. I'd love to do like what Headley's done, but I mean he was given like 9 months and unlimited resources because he's on the Australian, and the Telegraph makes all the money that subsidises the Australian that gets all the credit. Just wanted to say that I hope this isn't going to end.
Only a few people.
But I
that's
mean,
right.
there are. But again, that was a great result. There's a man in prison that should have been there 30 years ago because of Headley's work and all that time. But the ones we do, we're doing, as I say, on the fly. We did you filed stories like I think you did a bit more work than me yesterday. But we do ours in like 30 odd. 30 minutes, but those really long podcasts like that, I'd love to do something like that. And it's like getting out of that area of being a newspaper reporter, and we're now becoming broadcast type.
Sort of, you're almost, John's done something similar stuff as well. You're almost heading towards being a documentary maker.
Yeah.
Via the medium of podcast.
Well, those podcasts are investigative.
They're investigative, yeah.
The trouble is, it's.
No, I just think that investigative journalists are people who take a long time to write stories.
And it's sort of poisoned
We lie.
documentaries because now they all emulate podcasts. If I see another journalist walking along in a documentary with a backpack and then looking at a whiteboard and staring at it and driving a car and talking to themselves, I will throw up.
Yeah, and the glasses used regularly to make a point.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, on the whiteboard that's covered in bits and pieces. Sorry, a documentary issue. Whiteboard covered with bits and pieces, paper everywhere, stabbed everywhere. I have never been into a police office in my entire life that has anything like that on the wall. You might have an ADK phone book for special occasions. That's old school joke, sorry. But if you walk in and see paper all over the walls and people looking at it seriously and tapping it with their glasses, complete and utter fabrication, which is another story for another time. But I suppose this is a curiosity I have too with podcasts. What sort of, I always thought the true crime books, for example, were read by people about my age and would occasional propensity for a pocket with a couple of pencils in it. Much to my great surprise, the demographic for true crime is in fact usually 25 to 50 and skewed towards female. We did when Hachette did a book of mine a couple of years ago, we pulled the stats just to see who we were in fact writing for, because I thought it's an interesting idea when to know your market rather than assume who it is. And we looked at the 62% rate of female 25 to 50. They were our readers. They were also the people who watch documentaries, crime documentaries. And I was absolutely flabbergasted. Have you been looking at your audiences to see where you're targeting as well? Or, sorry, who's picking it up, and do you adjust your podcast to talk more to that market rather than pick up the usual suspects?
Everyone's looking at me because I'm female, aren't you? Everyone's like, yeah. Well, I do have an opinion. It will not shock you.
It's because
You're the market.
It.
Oh, okay. Yeah, this lot won't shut up. That's why I got it right. Okay. So, yeah, I mean, it's certainly female-led. We've looked at the data, but we know that across true crime anyway. And if you come to my lectures, when we still had big face-to-face lectures, so I'm talking 400 or 500 students, they'll be predominantly female. And I actually had one of our friends, Mark Llewellyn, in to do something. He was pre-recording, kind of setting the scene of me in the lecture. And afterwards, he's like, they're all girls. Now, they're a sea of people in first year. No offence to first years, but there's 500 of them, right? It's just a mass. I didn't even notice. I'm so used to it, but the vast majority, maybe 90%
What was
of
the
my
subject?
students. This would be criminology. So this would have been probably my introduction to criminology course. So mostly criminology students, but a lot of psych students as well. Yeah, very heavy. And so they're starting from, the 18, 20, they're the ones showing an interest. So yeah, definitely very female-led. Yeah. Yeah, but I don't think it changes the way we approach our podcast, but we are definitely aware of who is listening.
Why is that? Why do you think
we're
it is
aware, or
no? Why do you think it's female-led?
Look, I'm often asked this question. We're asked this question. I think that it's about controlling the narrative in some way. It's about wanting to listen to things at a safe distance. I mean, it applies to men too. But I've spoken to women about what the attraction is to true crime. They like a conclusion, and they generally like it when the villain cops it. And I think it's a market. I stand corrected, but last I read it was growing about 20% per annum, true crime, across the various mediums, and the majority of those people are women. But why that is, I don't know definitively. Do you know, Duncan?
I haven't got I have a couple of speculations. I was just curious, does it also run to gangland stuff that you've been running, for example, for years? You've covered Melbourne gangland inside out. Do you think that also resonates, that market?
Yeah, there's a strong fascination with evil. Chopper Reed says posh people love gangsters. Damien Runyon said a very similar thing. There's always been that attraction, and why are there bad people? At the moment, we've got the mushroom poisoning case in Melbourne, and that has just gone ballistic. It's in the London Times, it's in the New York Times. Irish Television wanted to interview me, and there's international streaming services who are contacting
I mean,
homicide.
That is one of those cases that, as you say, just gets the whole world captivated because it's so unusual with the gangland. I'm starting to see, I think, again, because of social media, younger people are getting attracted to these gangsters a lot because they're also advertising that they're in Lamborghinis and they're buying their girlfriends
That's changed everything.
Louis
I mean,
Vuitton.
the crooks used to try and keep a low profile.
Yeah.
And now they've got Instagram.
Yeah, well, that's right.
It's going to be
Do you have Instagram?
I wouldn't even know what it is.
Yeah,
We're going to have a Love Island with gangsters. You know that Hunted?
Well, you remember how you used to meet gangsters and have a quiet beer? That's how you met your contacts. They're now all in the gyms. Now,
Are you not in the gym, Mark?
you can't you tell?
When
Jim
there was a shooting at a hairdresser's recently, and he said, "Oh, thank God, I'm safe."
You know that Hunted television program where I contacted an ex sort of SOG bloke out of Queensland and said, he's a good talker, and I said, would you like to be on that? And he said, at the end, can I shoot him? And I thought, how good a television series would that be? I'd watch it, where if you get there, you get $100 grand. If you don't, you get one in the leg.
Hopefully one of the
I don't
networks
think
is listening. That might be picked up.
It sort of moves away from podcasting quite neatly. I love it. I think it's a
you can
fabulous
understand
idea.
what happens to poor old Josh when you get a couple of old blokes. Anyway.
Yeah, actually, I know the
gibbering
syndrome.
away, yeah.
I know the syndrome. I keep muttering about old people that I know or older than me who segue. And do you remember when so and so did so and so? I thought I was still in bloody primary school, and I'm old. Yeah. Anyway, it's curious. But I suppose, can podcasting also keep up with those fast-running stories that you're all doing now?
Well, that's ours is kind of crossing over as a weekly. I don't know whether you do. Something happens, so you'll just
so
do
we do like hard and fast ones. Sorry, that sounded weird. Anyway, just to move on from that. So we do ones kind of on the fly when necessary. That might be a better way.
Not so good either.
yeah. So we do pick up if it's a big
Fast
story.
turnaround.
Fast. Thank you, Duncan, for rescuing me.
Old TV expression.
A fast turnaround, when it's a big story. Yeah, we do. Like Lucy Letby, we did one on that we dropped really quick, and that was really popular.
So, well, that's, again, we'll do, like, breaking TikToks on the day. And
Do you
then
dance as well?
Sorry?
Do you dance when you do it? Or?
I want to do one, he won't let me.
Rapping to a rap sheet.
But that's all these new mediums now are changing they're changing the audience. I know it's still predominantly supposed to be older females, true crime writing books, but I still think our audience, like phenomenally, has got more younger people, and that's which our bosses love because Telegraph readers are dying, literally.
I think another part of it is, and particularly with those ones when you're doing a quick turnaround on the day, is that you're giving listeners or readers, whatever it is, an insight into what's actually happening. And you know, one of the reasons on the comments on our TikToks, one of the things they love are the fact that the Daily Telegraph office hasn't been updated since the early 90s. So it looks a bit old and it's a bit vintage and it looks a bit legitimate. And so, but also we can talk about, you know, on the podcast this week, I spoke about the fact that on the afternoon of Lily James's murder, I got a text from a homicide cop having a go at me because we'd identified her and he didn't think it was the right thing to do. So I think it's little stuff like that. And obviously with you guys, you know, your insight into having sat down across from all these people, it's
Too many
fascinating.
of them, 30,000 over a number of years. But, you know, you acquire knowledge. I think it's all about the 24/7 news cycle. And, you know, news is constantly changing. You know, you get online and look at the newspapers, and what was the lead story at 6 a.m. is right down the list by midday. And I think if you're going to be relevant, unless it's a deep dive podcast, you need to do these hard and fast ones that we're experimenting with. Because people, as you're quite right, people want to know. We know about the crime, but what's the story behind the crime? What about the offenders? The big problem I've been having, Zaz's been having the last few days, probably you guys too, is the mushroom case. Myriad, kind of requests for interviews, but it's the old sort of thorny issue of sub judice. How far can you go? And what do you talk about?
Could you two do a podcast which is actually examine the fascination in the case? Why is this particular crime the one that's taken off internationally, rather than the nuts and bolts?
I think it's a
of
great
what happened
idea.
and who done it and all the rest of it.
Guest appearance by Gordon Ramsay.
Because I'm asked that, why is everyone so interested in this case? And I say, well, I don't know. It's
so
Shakespearean, it's Macbeth, it's country love, it's got all those things without wishing to trivialise the magnitude of it. But why it's gone global, no idea.
There's a bit of Lindy Chamberlain with people going, she didn't cry. She pretended to cry, but there were no tears.
That's
so
right.
everyone's doing body language stuff,
Yeah,
which
exactly.
can be profoundly wrong, as we well know.
Oh, we know people have gone down on that. They've been very wrongfully treated, unjustly treated because of their body language.
Yeah, it's that assumption we have, and I was chatting with someone yesterday. Actually, I was doing a podcast, oddly enough, and talking about that very same thing. And it's slightly tangential, but juries have the same issue as well. People might get convicted because we don't think you acted like we would have acted in extraordinary circumstances. And I've encountered this thing in the US covering a case some years ago where a bloke had been convicted for murdering his wife and child, which was at best a horrible case, but also very complicated, to put it mildly. And the jury's assumption, in the US you can actually go and talk to the jury afterwards. This is quite civilised. In Australia you've got to sneak up on them in the pub. They're happy to talk to you, so you can doorstop them and just have a natter. And they're always of the view that this bloke did something, in our experience, we wouldn't have done that, what he did. And I thought, but how many people of you have actually been involved in such things? How many of you people listening today have actually had a copper put a set of handcuffs on you and say, congratulations, you're arrested for murder? There's an assumption we'd know how you'd act, and we tend to predicate our views on that. And I think it's horribly wrong. And as Tim was saying, she didn't cry enough. Well, how much is enough? What would I do in the circumstances?
My mum was on a jury and she just knew the minute he walked in because of his eyes, how close they were together. He was gone.
I have to admit,
No, I'm
civil
serious.
judgments.
That's what she said. She said, I knew straight away.
He didn't look
And
right.
if we had more jurors like that, the jury system, the justice system, we'd get rid of a lot of the backlog. It'd be a lot quicker trials.
Yeah, opening address, convict, Theo.
Or just have my mum in every single jury. She'd go, yeah, no, eyes are okay. No, no.
Barely time in the jury room for a scotch finger and a cup of tea before decision.
Yeah.
I've got a warhorse story on that, sorry, but I was involved years ago in the trial of Bruno Grollo. John, you'd remember it well. And I actually had to examine the co-accused. He's deceased now, a guy by the name of John William Flanagan, who was bipolar disordered, and that was the kind of
Ex-army chap?
That was the kind of hook we needed to create some reasonable doubt, and there was reasonable doubt. But getting back to juries, Grollo, who you may not know about in Sydney, he was one of the wealthiest guys in Melbourne, and he was very involved with transcendental meditation, an excellent practice, I must say. But he bought it was a monastery, wasn't it, out at Watsonia, and he was pumping a lot of money into this, and he had some people come out and meditate every day during the trial, and he also had a panel of jury selection experts from the US who flew in to give advice about the best sort of juror and so on. And there's this sort of pseudoscience surrounding all of this, but it's becoming big business.
There's a really good Bull, the TV show. Have you seen that? That's all about, it's got Michael, it's okay.
There's
Jury
a sort of
selection
live commentary. They're watching a Twitch, a movement, and that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
And they're watching the
And they have them all hooked up and there's people in it. It's a really good show.
Yeah, it's fabulous. I don't think. Could you see? I don't think that'd work in a New South Wales jury.
Sorry?
Yeah, he did.
Yeah,
one
that's
called The
actually
Juror.
was one of his, like one of the books. So I don't think it's a practice used here. Where I think that in America they actually do have a panel of psychs at the back, and
It's coming.
I'm sure it's. You make a lot of money out of it. You should look into it.
Yeah, well, we have to deal with the court watchers who, if you ever go to court in New South Wales, if there's a juicy trial and there's always 3 or 4 people that are there every day, go and talk to them. Oh, I don't like the juror, the juror's got a problem there. They're always not terribly insightful, but always entertaining, and they'll sit in the back of the court every day, and they come in handy occasionally because I used to get phone calls from them during a trial. I was getting bored rigid somewhere else, went off for lunch, and you get a call, come back, there's something about to happen. And they talk to the lawyers. They do things as journalists, you can't cross. Well, there's a line that you possibly shouldn't nudge too hard about approaching people. These people are utterly fearless. They'll walk up and talk to anyone. And they'll even wave at the judge when they come in the morning. They're a terrific source of information. Just curious, segueing back after a couple of hearing bits and pieces. Do you
Be a
think
great idea for the next podcast. Juries. The
yes.
psychology of juries. I think that'd be a winner. Absolutely.
And
Because you
like-
can't speak to jurors after trials in Australia.
It's a criminal offence.
Yeah.
They can approach you, but yeah, it's a bit like 12 Angry Men, a podcast of that, wasn't it? The movie.
I commend you to the Courthouse Hotel Bar in Darlinghurst, where they invariably go at around about 4:15, if you happen to be there, and wear something notable. Moving back to podcasts, I suppose. Doing podcast, could you actually consider almost doing them like a live cross, going back to what you used to do, going out to crime scenes back in the old days, as opposed to sending Josh out these days? Actually
dangerous, that's
going
where it
back
goes,
out
yeah.
and sort of doing something, but giving that in-depth podcast from a location, I suppose, where a crime's happened, and then expanding on it, rather than just the stand-up TV thing, bang, bang, this happened, that happened, see you later.
You're reinventing history. There was a thing called Newsbeat, which I think 28 years in Melbourne. I'm sure it would have been in Sydney. So a journo would follow all either Friday night or Saturday night, and it was on a Sunday morning. So they're at the car accident, and they're talking to the ambo, how's he going? Oh, I don't think he's going to make it, and so on. And it got cancelled when the guy got overexcited. And, there's somebody who's been hit by a car, and he put the microphone down, and you hear, he goes, ladies and gentlemen, you've just heard the death rattle.
Maybe
Ask
not
him if
that
it was his
close.
birthday. No, sorry. Just an in-house journalist joke about.
So, again, you just see that this fascination has always been there. Back Pajama Girl days, that sort of thing, they would run, the papers would run like 15,000 words from a trial if it was salacious. And you just could not,
So the thing
page after page.
With podcasts, is you're very mindful and being respectful of the victims and stuff, and that's with podcasts because you can control it. So whereas and that's where we're lucky because sometimes there is gallows humour, and some of the things we might say are totally inappropriate. Police officers do it too. So with podcasts, you've got to keep in the back of your mind that there are victims out there. So in the podcast, you can edit when you cross the line, whereas something like what you're talking about, and there is discussions now going around about doing those sort of live streaming things on your phones, like 24/7, like what actually Sky News does all the time. But again,
I shudder to think about that. When do you get any peace?
yeah, true. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think I'd sentence a few of us to go back to working nights again. That was just too hard. I suppose that brings out the other point. What the impact you've been doing podcasts and writing about crime most of our lives? What sort of impact, still doing it all these years later? What sort of impact does it have on you? You've spent your entire life looking at fairly gruesome, horrible subjects, some pretty terrifying stuff.
It gives you an excuse to drink, doesn't it? So I mean, that's.
I had noticed that. Yeah.
You can always say, I have to. I say to my wife, it was a horrible case. I have to. But that we do have counselling services and stuff there, but I think you do get a little bit immune to it, and some people don't. You do see some people get really affected, and there are cases that affect every journalist differently. I can imagine what some of the things that, particularly you've heard, some of the minds you've delved into. I'm fascinated to some of the people you talk to, but does it take its toll when you're talking to a bloke or a person there just talks about how they can calmly kill somebody?
It can. You become desensitised to it a bit. I've learned through bitter experience the best way of doing it is just setting up boundaries around what you do. I don't take work home. I try not to think about it. And there are certain films I won't watch. But look, it's inevitable that through exposure to this material, it creeps into your psyche like osmosis. You know, you can't get away from it. And, you know, I don't know about the others, but certainly when I was raising younger children, I was very protective. It's around about the time that Mr. Cruel was around. You know, it affects you. You know, it just goes, you know, you roll with it or you don't, but you can't deny it. What do you think, Zath?
Yeah, well, I think it does get to you, and you find out mechanisms. You know, some people have a drink, other people do other things to kind of, you know, get past it. But there was only one point where I thought I was getting too close to it, and it was when I was writing my first book, Mothers Who Murder. And I spent months writing this book, looking really in depth into these cases. And I was on a train in Sydney. It was coming up to Christmas. And there was a woman sitting opposite me. I was in the, you know, the entry little vestibule bit, and she had this baby, and she was talking to it. And I was going through all the, like, baby's well dressed, good eye contact, well nourished, you know, all these kind of like signs of abuse. None of them were there. There was no reason for it. It was just I was so attuned to looking at children and almost expecting abuse and potential murder. And I was like, oh, this is not normal. When you're looking at a child that's perfectly healthy, thinking, no, that child isn't in danger, like, that's not right, is it? So I was like, I think I need to step away from this topic for a bit because my brain is in an unhealthy place.
The other day I was somewhere and I was in a motel, and the young girl in the next room had a problem with her getting into the room, and so I helped her and I used a key. And later I'm thinking, what if she makes an allegation? What if my fingerprints?
Yeah, your DNA
and you start
and
thinking
fingerprints
about
on
really
that key.
stupid
Yeah,
things,
yeah.
which I do quite often. But you'd start thinking about crime all the time. Or if you hear a backfire, you think, oh, what time was that? In case it's a gunshot, I can tell the police it was 11:27. You know, you do get a bit carried away with it.
I do that too. Yeah.
On the flip side, do you actually worry about the audience as you're delivering podcasts to? What's going through their minds? What sort
Are
of
we
things?
training them?
Yeah.
Well,
my brother's
are
got
we
this
training-
view. Why are
Serious,
women
yeah.
such high fans of true crime? It's because they're trying to get ideas how they can knock off the husband. I don't think my brother's in a very good relationship. He's a little bit suspicious of
We
why.
need to talk later.
Okay, done.
So, time to get the meter read, mate.
That came out of a strange, when I was writing for a while back, the highest rating thing I ever wrote for Channel 7 was just a fast and dirty story about Kathleen Knight. Kathleen Knight, absolutely terrifying. She worked in an abattoir. She had lots of sharp knives. She had a disagreement with her partner. She killed him, skinned him, and then
Cooked him.
yeah, the worst
And
part.
then she made gravy.
Yeah, she started roasting. Then she set the table in the kitchen and then invited his kids around for lunch. Fortunately, the police arrived before the diners arrived. But what always worried me, and I just had to stop and think about it, is my audience absolutely relish this sort of stuff. Am I feeding a very bad habit?
Yeah.
Yeah, there are some very, very strange. Like there are people who are obsessed with blood and really gory stories, and others. For me, my fascination first started with crime. It's more the mystery or the detection or trying to figure out how crimes are solved. You know, not how they're done. It's how to catch the bad guys. You know. But you're right, there are some people there with some very, very weird obsessions with crime, you know. They want to see the gory stuff, you know.
Equally, I get a lot of feedback when you do a story about a hero or a victim who has overcome. That's when you actually get the feedback going, well, yeah, thanks for telling the story of that, you know, that person. And for all we've talked about, certainly, I reckon it's the amazing decency. As much as the villainy, which balances that out. And I honestly am an optimist about these things. You know, Messina Vargas, a young woman who was stabbed to death by a serial killer, Peter Norris Dupas. Everyone knew it was the case, and the Dupas had been sentenced to 3 life no minimums. He was never getting out of jail. And then a piece of evidence came through, which was Andrew Fraser, who had done time with him. And I reckon just about anywhere in the world, they wouldn't have prosecuted. He's not going to do a day's jail. And yet the Director of Public Prosecutions, Paul Coglan, said, we're going to run the trial. They did. He was convicted. His conviction was quashed, and they ran it again. So I reckon you're not getting change out of $1 million. And yet, as long as we will do that for the Halvargas family, so that they can have their day in court, we remain a civilised society.
Gives them closure. Yep, very important. Questions?
Which is a perfect time to go to questions. We've got a couple of minutes left, so questions. Anything on Zoom? Nothing on Zoom. Yes. Lady down the front here. A microphone inbound. One moment. So everyone, you're live stream now.
Oh boy. Okay. Going back to the education thing, I think all of you have touched on it slightly, but do you think that women also are taking some guidance maybe for what not to do? Poor Lily James, she had no idea that, you know, she might be in danger in
Well,
that
we don't
time.
know that, do we?
No.
She may have had an idea.
Okay.
But she was only with him for 5 weeks. She left him for a
Sure.
reason, and I guarantee he didn't go 0 to 100.
Sure. But
So
do
there
you
was
think
something
some of
going
the
on there.
stories you might be thinking, okay, I might have instantly walked down the street, blah, 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 on my own, 11 o'clock at night, and I wouldn't think about it, but I'm hearing it again and again and again in
Yep.
podcasts. That's probably not a smart thing to do.
Yeah, I think it's certainly educational. When Tim and I did the one about domestic violence that can result in homicide, we spoke about Hannah Clark and other cases that are well known. And we talked about all the red flags, and part of it was so that people recognise those red flags, because they may start really low level, but every case you hear that's the results in domestic homicide, and in this case with Lily James, they say there was no AVO, there's no formal history of domestic violence. And I go, if somewhere in that history there will be something, there will be a red flag. She may not have seen it, but maybe his family or somebody else, but it will be there. Whether somebody saw it for what it potentially became, probably not. But there will always be red flags. Always. I've never seen a
Do you
case that
identify
hasn't.
the red flags in your
Yeah.
podcast? That
Yeah, we
goes from here
speak
to here to
about the
here?
red flags, and it's like, these are the issues. And I guarantee everyone here knows somebody whose relationship they're concerned about. Now,
Yeah,
that's
well-
only on the outside.
Well,
What is going
yours
on
will be similar
inside?
to the police. The police have got a sort of like a checklist
Yeah.
of the red flags, and right, you got this, 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 but hands around the throat is an instant referral. If the victim says he put his hands here, they go, well, that is a pathway to homicide. So that immediately goes to the specialist.
Yep.
So you don't need the checklist, and there'll be other ones as well that you
Yeah.
know of
Yeah.
that you just go, whoa,
Yep.
that's
Yeah.
that's the end of it.
But it always starts really insidiously, and that's what we were trying to educate women. Like, these are the things you need to look for. These are the things that should be concerning you. If you're in a relationship, you need to, reflect on these issues.
I think we've got to start educating the the males
You can
as
say
well.
the boys.
But
We
I
talked
think
about that too.
we've got to start at
Yeah.
5.
We talked about all of this. Listen, Mark,
yeah.
listen to the podcast.
Oh, I don't listen to mine. I listen to yours.
We'll listen to
Ours is better.
Available on Spotify or Apple.
Both.
wherever you get your podcast.
It's a very topic. I did an op-ed piece for the Daily Mail. Come out tomorrow. I know. Look, it's not the Telegraph and it's not the Age, but humble
That's where
blokes
we
have to start somewhere.
That's where we stole Josh from the Mail. So.
Looking at the red flags, and look, anyone can be a victim, right? Because often you don't notice the red flags. Often you're desensitised into it. You know, it starts out with love bombing. You're the best person in the world. Here's the chocolates. Here's everything you need. And then quite insidiously, the control starts. Why do you need to go out? Why do you need to go? Who were you talking to at work? I want to look at your phone. And don't see your family anymore. And they systematically remove any external sources of objectivity. And then when they want to leave, and this is the point we've driven home so many times, the most dangerous time for women is when they're preparing to leave and after they've left. And that's the danger time in terms of being potentially murdered.
But I would say you're right. It's not really about the women. Yeah, we try and protect ourselves. It's the men that are the problem. They're the ones who are killing us, right? It's the men. Sorry, men, but it's true. You're the ones who... And we talk about educating the boys because it's the attitude coming from the boys that is the problem. That's where we need to start. We need to start when they're small.
That's what I've... And it's the same with drugs. We all start these programs when they're 12, 13. By then it's too late. But I do like the nuns did. Scare the shit out of you early.
Well,
Oh, no, maybe use it a little bit more subtly now, but we've come a long way since then. But
I'm not sure. But, you know, I think it's more than the 3
I don't
R's
have a
at
degree,
school.
obviously.
It's you know, I've been arguing for this for a long time. There should be social skills training taught in primary school, conflict resolution, respect of female pupils. All this needs to be part of the curriculum rather than just, you know, who is Captain Cook and all that sort of stuff. Important, but the social stuff is very important because that's when the platform for this other nonsense and danger starts. It's in their
What about
formative
at
childhood
home?
years.
At home, massively important. Role models. Yeah.
What-
Role
yeah.
models at home, I think. Sorry. Yeah, I think that's really important. Like males who are treating females respectfully, women who expect respect. Yeah, seeing that I think is huge.
You know, coppers will tell you that so many of these young offenders have no strong male
Yeah.
role model.
Or the wrong, who is actually, they've actually replicated what they've seen at home.
One senior bloke went on patrol, hadn't been for years, and he was just staggered. He said, we've got 25-year-old men who regress to being 13, and they've never heard the word no. So you've got a copper goes, look, you're not going into that club, you're pissed. You need to go home. But why? But why? My mates are in there and they've drunk as much as me.
Yeah.
Mate, you got to go, right? You're not getting in. My dad's a lawyer. Now, mate, we've got a choice here. You can go in a cab or you can go in the van. You can't talk to me that way. Bang, you're in the van. and you're going...
Happened to me just recently. No.
I'd be going, righto, I'm in the cab.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's true.
Our grand final, police weren't taking noisy partying. A bloke walked into a police station, he's 80, he's in tears. He says, they won't turn the music down next door. My wife is dying. She's here, she's dying, she can't sleep. A copper I know very well, who may have my surname, said, right, I'll go round there. And he went round straight away. And what was annoying, they weren't crooks, they were just young people. And he goes into the backyard, a bloke fronts him. What are you doing? You can't come here, get out. He goes, no, I'm sorry, I can be here. I've had a complaint and I need to see the owner of the house. You don't, get out. Look, I can fine the owner $1,000 right now. I don't want to do it, but let's go in and talk. We go through the whole process and I'm not giving him a name and address. Well, you're going to get fined. Okay, name and address. Turn the stereo down, all the rest of it. Fronted about 3 times, gets out, about to get in the police car, and the bloke goes, nice park, mate. And everyone's trying to stand them up and everyone's got a camera. So years ago, a similar set of circumstances, I know of a copper goes in, noisy party, can you turn the music down? Yeah, sure. Gets to the driveway, music up.
Yeah.
Comes back, look, can you turn the music down? Yeah, sure. Gets to the driveway, comes back, pulls his baton out, goes smash, smash, smash to the stereo and said, don't worry, turning it down now, and just left. Solution. But you can't do this though.
We're a bit more subtle in New South Wales. We generally pull the fuse out and throw it into the next door neighbours, if anyone was watching. On that note, I think we're about time. So I'd like to thank you all for coming this afternoon, and for those watching on Zoom, fabulous. I'd like to thank this wonderful panel for keeping everyone entertained and learning a lot on the way through. And we're about to adjourn outside, so if you'd like to go and buy some books, because they all have them outside waiting, please do. They're fabulous volumes to go and look at.
Because of legal reasons.
I think they might have one of your older ones out there. I think.
It's the one that hasn't sold any at all.
Thank you for coming.
Yes, thank you all for coming again.
Much appreciated. Thank you.